By sunrise, nearly the entire farm had disappeared beneath brown water. The night storm had flattened the weeds, filled the old planting rows, and carried branches across the low field. Only the roof of the sagging barn and the upper trunks of several willows remained clearly above the flooded ground. Sarah Whitmore stood knee-deep beside the oldest tree, pulling at a thick mass of roots buried beneath the mud. For most of the morning, nothing changed. The water remained still and opaque. Dead leaves floated between the submerged rows. Farther uphill, two neighboring farmers watched from the gravel road, waiting for Sarah to admit that the land had defeated her again. She wrapped both hands around the roots and pulled. A heavy black bundle tore free from the earth. At first, only a few bubbles rose beside her boots. Then the water began turning in a slow circle. The circle widened. Mud and leaves spun toward its center, and the surface dropped around a place where no open ditch could be seen. An entire section of the flooded field was draining downward. The farmers on the road stopped laughing. Sarah did not celebrate. She knelt in the water and watched carefully, because she knew that finding an opening was not the same as restoring a system. Several months earlier, she had purchased the property at a county tax sale for $6,500. If you enjoy quiet stories about ruined farms, overlooked clues, and people who see value where others see only trouble, subscribe and join us. Sometimes a useless field is not useless at all. Sometimes it has simply lost the path it once depended on. Sarah had spent most of her working life maintaining roadside ditches, culverts, and storm drains for the county. She understood how water behaved around roads, slopes, and buried pipes. But she had never owned farmland. After losing her job during a round of budget cuts, she began looking for a small property where she could grow vegetables and rebuild a simpler life. The listing showed 14 acres in southern Illinois, an old barn, several mature trees, and the remains of a vegetable field. The price was lower than many used tractors. Nobody else bid. The photographs had been taken during dry weather. Sarah first saw the truth 2 days after signing the papers. A spring rain moved across the county, and she drove to the property expecting muddy roads and shallow puddles. Instead, she found a lake. Water covered most of the field from the barn to the roadside channel. The remains of planting rows vanished beneath the surface. The ground near the entrance was soft enough to swallow her boots. Frank Dalton, the former owner, arrived to remove several tools he had left in the barn. He had farmed the land years earlier, before repeated flooding made the property impossible to use. He looked over the water and told Sarah she would need a boat before she needed a tractor. The joke spread quickly among nearby farmers. One called the property Sarah's private swamp. Another said the county had finally found someone willing to pay for 14 acres of standing water. Sarah said very little. She waited for the field to dry. 3 days passed. The neighboring farms became workable again. Her field remained flooded. 1 week later, the water had dropped only a few inches. Sarah walked the boundary and examined every visible outlet. A roadside ditch ran along the lower edge of the property, but almost no water entered it from the field. The ditch itself was choked with weeds, branches, and bottles. That gave her a simple first explanation. The land flooded because the exterior channel was blocked. Sarah believed that once she cleared it, the farm would begin behaving like the neighboring fields. She had not yet understood that the water was trapped long before it reached the ditch. Sarah spent several days clearing the roadside channel. She cut thorny brush, removed branches, lifted old wire from the mud, and dug sediment from a narrow culvert beneath the entrance road. Once opened, the channel began carrying water freely toward a larger drainage creek beyond the property. The work looked successful. After the next rain, water rushed through the cleaned ditch exactly as Sarah had expected. But the field remained flooded. The channel worked. The land did not. Sarah waited until the surface looked firm enough to support a small tractor. She drove only a short distance before the rear wheels sank deep into the black soil. The tire spun, throwing mud against the fenders, and the axle settled lower. A neighbor pulled the tractor out with a larger machine. The field had looked dry from the road. Beneath the surface, it was still saturated. Sarah studied the slope. The difference in elevation between the middle of the property and the roadside ditch was small, but it should have been enough for shallow surface drainage. She rented a compact excavator and opened a narrow trench from the wettest part of the field toward the lower boundary. Water immediately entered the trench. For several hours, Sarah believed she had solved the problem. Then the flow slowed near a slight rise in the ground. The trench widened and began cutting into the soft soil rather than carrying water cleanly across it. One section collapsed, leaving a shallow muddy basin. To deepen the entire route would require far more excavation than Sarah could afford. It would also divide the usable land with an open ditch that machinery would have to cross. Her first plan had failed. She filled the most damaged section and began observing the field instead of forcing it to change. After every rain, she marked the areas that dried first. Most patterns followed small rises and natural slopes. One did not. A narrow pale strip appeared diagonally across the flooded ground. At first, it looked like an old vehicle track, but it was too straight and did not lead to the barn, road, or gate. The soil along it became firm while water still stood on both sides. The strip ended near an old willow growing close to the lower edge of the field. Sarah returned with a metal probe she had once used to locate culverts beneath roadside shoulders. She pushed it into the soil along the dry line. For several attempts, the probe passed through soft earth. Then it struck something hard. Sarah moved several feet and tried again. The same resistance appeared at nearly the same depth. She began digging with a shovel. Below the dark topsoil, she found a curved piece of fired clay. It was not a stone. Its surface was smooth, and one edge followed a circular shape. Sarah widened the hole. A short section of old clay drainage pipe appeared beneath the field. The pipe was small enough to lift with one hand, but it extended in both directions. One joint had separated, allowing wet sand to enter. Sarah had seen old field drainage before, though most systems she knew used modern perforated plastic pipe. Clay tiles had been laid beneath farms for generations, often without detailed maps. Instead of carrying water across the surface, they collected excess moisture below the roots and moved it toward an outlet. The farm had once possessed a hidden drainage network. Sarah followed the line toward the willow. Every few yards, she pushed the probe down and found another section. Several pipes were broken, but many remained in place. Near the tree, the line disappeared beneath a dense wall of roots. Sarah dug beside the trunk and uncovered a wider pipe filled completely with mud and tangled fibers. It appeared to be the main collector. She removed loose dirt and pulled at the first layer of roots. Only a thin stream escaped. The field remained wet. The buried system had not disappeared, but it was no longer connected well enough to carry the water away. Sarah now knew why the land once worked. She still did not know how much of that old system could be saved. Sarah began mapping the buried lines. She used wooden stakes to mark every place where the probe struck clay. A pattern slowly emerged. Smaller lateral pipes crossed the old planting rows and joined a larger diagonal collector leading toward the willow and roadside channel. The system was larger than she had expected. It was also badly damaged in several places. Some sections had settled unevenly. Others had cracked under the weight of machinery. Fine soil had entered the open joints and hardened inside the pipes. The largest failure lay near the lower edge of the field. The collector had collapsed beneath the willow roots, and the original outlet had disappeared under years of sediment. Water reaching that point had nowhere to go. It backed into the sidelines and slowly saturated the field. Sarah first tried clearing it from the outside. She removed roots, mud, and broken clay from the visible opening. When the blockage loosened, a narrow stream appeared. She waited for the flow to strengthen. It did not. The water behind the blockage was still trapped by a collapsed section farther uphill. Sarah opened another trench and found that the main pipe had broken into several pieces. The ends no longer aligned. One section sat several inches higher than the other, creating a barrier that water could not climb. Restoring the farm would require more than pulling roots from a hole. Sarah measured the depth of each surviving section and calculated the slope between them. She purchased only enough modern drainage pipe to bridge the destroyed portions. Replacing the entire network would have cost many times more than the property itself. Repairing the central breaks might allow the original clay lines to work again. Her first connection failed. Sarah placed the new pipe between two old sections and covered it carefully. After a rain, Water collected on the upper side but barely reached the outlet. She reopened the trench. The replacement pipe was too high. The difference was small enough to look harmless, yet it interrupted the gentle downhill grade. In a system driven only by gravity, a few inches mattered. Sarah removed the pipe, deepened the trench, and reset it. This time, muddy water began moving through the connection. She added a small access point so the collector could be inspected without reopening the entire field. Near the roadside channel, she rebuilt the outlet with stone to keep loose soil from washing back inside. Then a heavy storm arrived. Rain struck the barn roof through the night and filled every shallow depression in the field. By morning, the farm looked exactly as it had on the day Sarah purchased it. Frank stopped beside the road and watched the water spread between the willows. From a distance, the repair appeared to have changed nothing. Sarah walked to the outlet. A steady brown stream flowed from the pipe into the roadside ditch. The system was working, but the field had absorbed too much water to dry immediately. Several hours later, the narrow diagonal strip appeared again. By evening, it had widened. The following morning, the tops of the old planting rows rose above the water. One day later, large sections of the field became visible. The lowest hollow remained flooded. Sarah tested the soil in the central rows. It was wet but no longer soupy. Water had moved out of the root zone quickly enough to prevent the entire field from remaining saturated for weeks. The old pipes had not created a dramatic instant transformation. They had done something more useful. They had given the water a direction. Sarah repaired only the sections necessary to reconnect the network. She resisted the urge to chase every broken lateral pipe. Some areas would never drain as well as others, and the lowest part of the property still collected water after major storms. She marked that section and stopped treating it as failed farmland. Instead of trying to force all 14 acres into production, she prepared a smaller planting area on the ground that consistently dried first. She chose pumpkins, squash, and sweet corn. The crops were practical for a first season. They did not require expensive specialized machinery, and Sarah could sell them directly at a roadside stand and local auto markets. The field was still late. While neighboring farmers had already planted, Sarah waited for the repaired ground to become firm enough to work. Some rows went in weeks behind the usual schedule. The first summer revealed more weaknesses. Roots began growing back around the outlet. Sediment collected in the access point. A hard rain washed loose soil toward the repaired pipe and partially blocked it. Sarah cleared the opening and reinforced the surrounding bank with larger stones. One lateral line delivered almost no water to the main collector. When she uncovered it, she found that several clay sections had separated. She repaired only the shortest gap and left the rest of that corner unused. Not every plant survived. A group of pumpkin vines in a shallow depression yellowed after repeated rain. Several rows of corn grew unevenly where the soil remained compacted. The wettest edge of the field never became suitable for planting. Sarah adjusted the farm around those limits. She raised several vegetable rows slightly above the surrounding ground. She kept machinery away from the softest areas. She inspected the outlet after every storm rather than waiting for water to stop moving. The improvements were modest but visible. After ordinary summer rain, shallow puddles remained for hours instead of weeks. The central field became workable while the roadside ditch still carried runoff from neighboring land. During one strong storm, the repaired collector reached its limit. Water covered much of the field again. Sarah did not consider that proof of failure. The old system had been built to manage normal rainfall, not prevent every flood. Its value lay in how quickly the water left once the storm passed. Within a day, the diagonal drainage line became visible. By the second day, Sarah could walk the central rows without sinking. The lowest hollow remained filled. She left it alone. Willows, reeds, frogs, and insects returned to that corner each season. The wet area also held some runoff before it reached the channel. Sarah had purchased 14 acres, but she did not need to control every foot of them. The useful farm was the part she could maintain without destroying the system that made it possible. By autumn, orange pumpkins lay between the green vines. Sweet corn stood in uneven but healthy rows. The harvest was smaller than Sarah had imagined when she first saw the property listing. It was also real. The field had not become perfect. It had become workable. Sarah's first season earned enough to cover seed, fuel, repairs, and part of the cost of restoring the drainage. The following year, she planted only the sections that had performed well. She repaired the barn roof, installed dry storage shelves, and cleared a firm path where buyers could collect pumpkins without driving into soft ground. The operation remained small. Sarah sold sweet corn during summer and pumpkins during autumn. She leased several of the drier acres to a nearby farmer who needed additional ground but did not want to purchase land. The lowest hollow remained unplanted. Each year, Sarah cleaned the collector outlet, removed roots, and inspected the access points before the rainy season. The buried clay lines were old and imperfect. A new collapse could appear without warning. One spring, a sideline failed and left a corner waterlogged. Sarah decided the repair would cost more than the area was worth. She moved the planting boundary rather than opening another long trench. That choice became part of how the farm survived. Sarah did not judge the property by how much land she could force into production. She judged it by what could be used reliably without spending more than the crops could return. Several years after the purchase, another heavy storm crossed southern Illinois. Frank drove past the property the following afternoon. He expected to see the familiar lake covering the old field. Instead, he found shallow puddles between green rows. Water flowed steadily from the restored outlet into the roadside channel. The lowest wetland still held water, but most of the working ground was already visible. The barn stood straight again. Crates, tools, and harvested vegetables filled the dry interior. The farm had not become one of the largest or richest properties in the county, but it produced income. Its drainage worked. The neglected buildings had value again. Sarah eventually received an offer for the land that was many times greater than the $6,500 she had paid. The buyer saw 14 acres near a road, a repaired barn, productive soil, and a functioning underground drainage network. Sarah saw something else. She remembered the flooded field, the trap tractor, and the first useless trench she had dug across the soft ground. She remembered the narrow strip of soil that dried before everything around it. She declined the offer. Later, standing beside the old willow, Sarah explained the farm's limits to Frank. The clay pipes could break again. Roots would continue searching for water. The outlet required regular cleaning. Extreme storms could still cover the field. Several acres would probably never be dependable cropland. The property had not been saved by one dramatic discovery. It had been restored through observation, measurement, failed repairs, and the decision not to demand more from the land than it could give. Sarah walked between the pumpkin rows as evening light crossed the field. Beyond them, water still shone in the low hollow. Near the road, a brown stream moved through the restored outlet and into the open channel. The land had never needed the rain to stop. It had needed someone to find the path the water had forgotten.